Senator Elizabeth Warren, thank you for coming on Bloomberg.
Thank you for inviting me.
I want to start with healthcare because there has been a Republican leadership group of about 11 or so men who are working on overhauling the healthcare in the Senate. People have said, a senior White House official has said that there is an optics problem. What do you make of all this?
Excuse me, women are not an optics problem. These men are going to get together and they're going to decide whether or not women are going to have access to birth control, whether or not we're going to have maternity coverage, whether or not there's going to be continued funding for Planned Parenthood. And they see that as an optics problem. That just tells me a big part of what's wrong with the Republican leadership in the United States Senate. The problem right now is health care for Americans, and it's access to affordable health care. And that includes women. We're not just optics, we're really there and need that health care.
Let me ask you, would you work with people like Senator Susan Collins and across the aisle if there was a bipartisan way to reform Obamacare?
You know, the Democrats right now are calling out to the Republicans, saying, come and work with us, but with two goals in mind. The first one is, let's find ways we can expand coverage, and the second one is to drive down cost. So, for example, we've got a big bill right now that would cut the cost of drugs, pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs. This is killing families, and it's also really driving up health insurance costs and driving up the cost for the federal government on what we cover. So there are lots of areas where we could improve health care coverage, not just optics, that's right, where we could really improve.
Let's talk about your 11th book, This Fight is Our Fight, a New York Times best-selling book. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
But I want to talk about a theme throughout it, and that's Glass-Steagall.
Yes.
You talk frequently about it.
Yeah, now everybody's going to be really excited when you say that, right?
well, I want to ask you, I'm just the reporter.
Okay.
But in the book about Glass-Steagall, several weeks ago, there was a meeting with top leaders on the Senate Banking Committee. Gary Cohn was at this meeting. Our very own reporters asked President Trump himself, and he said that he was taking a look at Glass-Steagall. Is there a chance for you, Senator Elizabeth Warren, to work with President Trump on reinstating a 21st century Glass-Steagall?
You bet. I mean, I am ready.
How realistic is it, though?
Well, I'm ready. I've already got the bill. And remember, I have a bipartisan bill already. My co-sponsor on this is John McCain and Maria Cantwell from Washington and Angus King, independent, from Maine. Let me put it in a little bit of context, though, in the book. What I talk about in the book is, I tell the long arc story, 1935 to today, and how in this time period, GDP keeps going up. But in the first time period, 1935 to 1980, we really see an expansion of America's middle class, working families, the working poor,
investment in
the
infrastructure.
Upper middle class, very much investment, but also careful regulation to make sure the playing field stays level.
And then that regulation goes away in the 1990s.
And Glass-Steagall is part of that. This is one of the innovations coming out of the Great Depression, is to say, you know, your grandma's checking account and banking account, that kind of banking should never be put at risk by the kind of high-stakes gambling that goes on Wall Street. Separate the two, build a wall.
And you write in the book that then candidate Donald Trump, who I covered extensively during the campaign, actually added this to the Republican platform.
Absolutely.
So have there been any back-channel discussions or private conversations between your office and the White House on this particular measure?
So not back-channel yet to the White House, but we're certainly reaching out to the administration generally.
Have they been receptive?
And so far, we've had some good conversations, and that's what I want to see happen. I'm ready, because, you know, this is one of those basic things. Folks on Wall Street may resist it, but most of the American people get it, that there's one kind of banking that's your boring checking account, savings account, and it really ought to be separated from high-risk gambling banking. Smaller banks would more easily compete against the big banks in those circumstances, and actually, smaller investment companies would be able to compete more easily against the investment companies. This is one of those walls that would let you actually have simpler regulations overall. If the banks are only doing banking, the banking regulators can see that. And if the investment companies are doing investment banking, the kind that they do, the kind of risk taking, then let's evaluate that separately.
Let's talk about taxes. I want to talk about taxes because it's dominating a lot of financial wonk world chatter.
Yep.
And President Trump, of course, has kickstarted the tax debate. He is saying that he wants to slash the corporate tax rate from about 39%. In your book, you note about the lobbying effort going on about the corporate tax.
Man, those guys are like swarms. They move through, because they want those tax cuts.
You write in your book, what all those executives and corporate suck-ups fail to mention is that after all the deductions, exceptions, and exemptions and credits, the average corporation's tax rate is about 20%. You then go on, Senator, to write that the U.S. corporate tax rate is in the bottom 25% of the world, behind Japan, Canada, and some other countries, and the UK. Should lawmakers, should Republicans, should Democrats vote to lower the corporate tax rate?
So my view is the giants have plenty of tax breaks as it is. I also talk about in the book how effectively many of them are taking home billions in profits and paying nothing in taxes. But there's
Boeing and Verizon.
That's right. But they have the larger issue. A generation ago, corporations paid about 30% of all the money it took to keep the federal government running. Today, it's under 10%. But here's the big difference that tilts the playing field. The guys at the top pay less and less. As you said, often, I talk about it in the book, in the single digits, even zero in taxes. While small businesses, medium-sized businesses, businesses that can't hide money in the Cayman Islands or move their intellectual property to someplace in Europe, they pay full freight.
So with corporate inversions, though, because the Republicans are going to argue, well, if you keep the corporate tax rate at a certain rate and you don't lower it, then you're incentivizing businesses to go overseas, so you don't buy that
That's
argument.
like saying, hey, look, we have left open a loophole for the giants to be able to evade taxes here in the United States. So let's lower the tax rate so they won't use the loophole. No. How about if we ask everybody to pay a fair share? And everybody includes the giants, the folks who do hire the army of lobbyists and army of lawyers. Because we need a progressive tax system so that we actually have the revenues to put into both investing in America's families and putting this country on sound financial footing.
The book is called This Fight Is Our Fight. I want to talk about a fight you had in 2013 against bank lobbyists over the budget deal and the swaps provision, the high risky trading. And it ultimately led to what I would describe as one of your most famous floor speeches in your time in the Senate. And I want to pull that portion because you say, after going toe-to-toe with Jamie Dimon in calling senators, including Democrats, as well as now former President Obama, you say, on the floor of the Senate, you said, let me say this to anyone who is listening at Citi, which of course was the dominant group backing that provision. I agree with you, Dodd-Frank isn't perfect. It should have broken you into pieces.
Yes.
Now, how disappointed were you with the Obama White House at the way that all went down? Because I remember covering it. You write about the reporters chasing after you in the hallway.
Right. No, what was so frustrating about this particular provision was that it was designed to drive up risk and to drive up profits for just a handful of mega giant banks. And ultimately, the impact of this provision that lobbyists wrote and managed to get into the bill right at the last minute, it had never been through a hearing in the Senate, managed to get it in right at the last minute, the lobbyists write it, and ultimately permitted big financial institutions to bring about $10 trillion worth of risky investments right onto their balance sheets, guaranteed by the U.S. taxpayer.
This matters because it's the identity of the Democratic Party. Because you write in this book, Democrats had no stomach for the fight.
Yeah. But put that in context.
Right.
It was stomach to shut down the government.
Okay.
Because it really was. Yeah. This is what was going on at this point. They had shoved it in at the last minute.
Was that the right decision?
It's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
Let me put it this way. I was ready to fight it all the way. But we didn't have the votes to shut down the government over this provision because Ted Cruz had just shut down the government. And we had seen what happens. It costs billions of dollars to shut down the federal government. And ultimately, those costs are borne by hardworking families. So you get caught between swallowing a budget that has a poison pill in it and saying, no, we got to stand up, stand firm, and fight back. But I will tell you one good thing that came out of that. After that, and after we raised a big enough stink about it nationally, we shifted, the Democrats did, and went forward on the next budget negotiations and every budget negotiation since then, describing it as no poison pills. Yeah, and at least so far, we've been able to keep out this kind of Dodd-Frank, let's blow another hole in the regulations to let big banks do whatever they want and put the rest of us at risk. We've been able to hold that off pretty aggressively.
I've got to ask you about student debt quickly, because I know that you had the first bill you introduced in the Senate was on student debt.
That's right. I also talk about that in the book.
Yeah, it's also in and you also put it in personal terms. You talked about a conversation with your mom, your dad, who was a janitor.
Yep.
And I guess my question is, do you see parallels? This is the first financial decision that many Americans make, is when they're 16 and 17 years old, and they're deciding whether or not to take on an enormous amount of debt.
Right.
Do you see, Senator, any parallels with what you saw in 2008 with the housing crisis, and now a situation where I think it's something like $1 trillion worth of student debt?
$1.4 trillion.
$1.4 trillion.
Going up at a rate of $100 billion a year.
This isn't a high school problem anymore.
No.
Do you see similarities, or are you concerned that this could ultimately be the next bubble, so to speak, or a too big to fail type of problem that could wreak havoc?
So this is a central part of what I talk about in the book, is the comparison about when we built an economy that worked for everyone because of policies made here in Washington, and how now it's about building an economy that works for those at the top. And I talk about my own experiences going to a commuter college that cost $50 a semester, growing up at a time when America subsidized student loans, put them in at below cost, and comparing that, I tell the story in the book about Kai, who, by the time I pick her up in the book, she has gotten her feet tangled up with a for-profit college. She's 27 years old, still doesn't have a diploma, and has $100,000 in student loan debt.
So how would she be expected to get a house or
And that is exactly the point. And those are the data. It's both the personal story of what this does.
Then?
Absolutely. Now, I want to describe it differently, because I think the student loan, it's less about inflating a bubble, and it's more about the effects it's having. It's like a cancer on the rest of the economy. Studies from Treasury, from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, from the Fed, talk about how young people, because of student loan debt, are not moving out of their parents' homes as early, not establishing their own households,
not buying,
there you go, not buying homes, not buying cars, not starting small businesses. And the consequences of that are felt everywhere in the economy. And student loan debt is going to choke the American economy, and it's moving in that direction already.
And with housing in particular, big hearing this week on the Senate Banking Committee. How viable is it to have a plan to let Fannie and Freddie build up capital and then free them from government control?
I think that's looking at it the wrong way. I think we need to reform our housing finance system, rather than deciding the way to do it is to build up capital and move in the other direction. We've got to rethink how we do housing finance.
When I was preparing for this interview, I asked a broad group of people about what they wanted me to ask you. And I'll tell you, something that surprised me was net neutrality. A lot of folks, what do you make of, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm in. Yeah. I mean, this is, the whole notion, this is one more way, as I see it, that the playing field gets tilted. And that is, if we don't have guaranteed net neutrality, then it lets the big guys come in and just roll over the small guys and just get the priority position for themselves and crowd everybody out of the space. This goes back to you were talking about the themes of the book, the long arc in the book. It goes right back to the beginning of the book, talking about the ways in which those with money and power roll over those who don't have it, and then the consequences for the rest of the economy. There was a time when we enforced the laws, enforced antitrust laws, put new banking regulations in place, put a tough cop on the beat on Wall Street. And when we did that, the playing field stayed level. Net neutrality is the 21st century version of that same
Can you do
kind
anything
of
to
fight.
prevent the rollback? Can Democrats do anything to prevent the rollbacks of Obama-era regulations on net neutrality?
You know, the main thing we have to do is we have to be willing to be in the fight, 100% completely committed, but we got to have people around the country in the fight. We need democracy on our side.
Final couple questions.
Sure.
Just one of the themes in the book is about Gina. The name was changed. She's a Walmart employee and someone who ultimately, and is from North Carolina, a mobile home, and ultimately she decided to vote for now President Donald Trump. We can talk a lot about the reasons for why President Trump was elected, but what should Democrats' message be to people like Gina in 2018?
So I think it's two halves. I think the first half is a message about Trump. He made a set of promises. He tapped into an anger that's real.
It's very
that's
real.
real and justified. And he made a lot of promises about what he was going to do. He got in office and he has made a 180-degree turn. And so instead of being there for working families like Gina's, instead of trying to help, what Donald Trump has done is he put together a team of billionaires and bankers, handed the economy over to them, and then he's just signed off on one law after another that, you know, undercuts worker safety and says companies that kill or maim their employees can hide that fact a little more easily, or companies that steal wages from their employees, or that investment advisors can cheat retirees. And then for me, the health care bill says it all. It's about knocking 24 million people off health care, raising costs for middle-class families, opening the door to discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions, all to produce a tax break for a handful of millionaires and billionaires.
So the McCarthy amendment didn't do enough.
So part one is it's not about what Donald Trump says. It's not about what he tweets at 3 a.m. or what slurs he throws out. It's about what Donald Trump actually does, whether he delivers and who he's delivering for. And so far, first 106 days, however far we are, it has been about delivering for those at the top and not for working people. But the second half has to be about what Democrats are willing to get out there and fight for. And that's what this book is about. We get out there and fight. The way I see it, we fight for opportunity. Fight for opportunity for young people. Fight for opportunity for people who want to work and earn a living. Fight for opportunity for seniors who want a chance to retire with some dignity. It's about what will be in this fight for, not a bunch of promises, but what it is on the ground you're going to fight for every day. You know, I never wanted to go into politics. This wasn't part of my life. But
really?
No, not
really?
even close.
Never,
I wanted to be a teacher. It's all I ever wanted to be. But I ended up, for pretty much all of my adult life, both teaching and doing work about what was happening to working families like the family I grew up in. And now working families have their backs against the wall. And if we don't fight back, this country could fundamentally change. Be a country that only works for those at the top, not a country of the kind of opportunity that it gave.
So everyone asks you if you're going to run for president, but I want to ask you actually, because I think that's a very serious question that shouldn't be a throwaway question. Good. So I want to ask you, you went through this thought process in 2012. I interviewed the Ready for Warren people. I've interviewed activists on both sides of the party. But this is a serious question. So what goes into making that decision?
So
how do you decide if, like, because you're someone who actually might do it, might not do it, but like, what do you actually put into that decision? That's the biggest decision you can make.
It's a very thoughtful question, but I actually have to put this in a temporal place. I'm not running for president. I'm running for my re-election for Senate in 2018, and I announced very early because I want people to know I am all in. I got to tell you, what scares me right now is what Donald Trump is going to do this evening, what he's going to do tomorrow morning, what he's going to do during the day tomorrow. The fight we have got to be in as a country has got to be what's going on right now in healthcare, in tax policy, in financial regulation, in infrastructure investment, in student loans, in education. Donald Trump truly is poised to deliver the knockout blow to America's middle class. And if we're not all engaged in the fight, and when I say all, I don't mean just all the folks in the Senate or even all the Democrats. I mean all the people. If we're not all engaged in that fight every single day, and if we're not drawn into it and making our voices heard, this country could fundamentally change, and it would happen on our watch. I believe that we have a moral responsibility to make this country once again a country that builds opportunities and makes investments for a future for our kids and our grandkids. And that doesn't mean a few of them, it means all of them.
Senator Elizabeth Warren on Bloomberg Television, we very much appreciate your time.
Thank you.